Hello. Now we will be dealing with the development of the tongue. From where this tongue develops? Tongue develops from the ventral aspect or the floor or from the floor of the pharynx. It develops from the ventral aspect and from the floor of the pharynx. And its development can be studied under three headings. The headings are the development of mucous membrane, the development of the muscles of the tongue, and the development of fibroareolar stroma. First, we'll talk with the development of mucous membrane of the tongue. The mucous membrane of the tongue develops from the endoderm of the foregut, and its development is studied or divided into two: the anterior two-thirds of the tongue and this is the anterior two-thirds of the tongue or oral part of the tongue. This is posterior one-third of the tongue or pharyngeal part. So the mucous membrane of the tongue, how it develops, this anterior part and this posterior part of the mucous membrane of the tongue, how do it develops? To know that, we need to go to the arches. Before the actual fusion of the arches, this is first arch, second, third, fourth, fifth disappears, and this is a sixth. Similarly on this side, 2, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Before the actual fusion of these arches on either sides, there develops few swellings, few fusiform swellings initially, which are a paired, these are the paired lingual swellings. Lingual swellings which take contribution from the first arch, like this. Two lingual swellings taking contribution first branchial arch, and immediately followed by this there is one more unpaired swelling which is called tuberculum impar, This takes contribution from the first and second arch, like this junction between the first and second arch. So these three swellings, two paired lingual swellings and one unpaired tuberculum impar, taking contributions from the first and second arch, fuse with each other. First these two fuse with each other, followed by this fusion with the tuberculum impar, and overall these three after fusing will give rise to anterior two-thirds of the tongue. So this anterior two-thirds of the tongue is formed by the fusion of these three, two tuberculum impar, two lingual swellings and one tuberculum impar. At this moment, at this time, the tongue is fixed to the oral cavity. So it has to get separated. So there exists a sulcus like this, a sulcus which separates the tongue from the floor of the oral cavity. A sulcus, if this is the floor of the oral cavity and this is the tongue, a sulcus starts appearing like this, and this one is a sulcus, and that sulcus is called alveolo-lingual sulcus. So the formation or the development of alveolo-lingual sulcus separates the tongue from the floor of the oral cavity. Now coming to The next part, that is how this posterior 1/3 is developed. Posterior 1/3 of the mucous membrane is developed. Again, there arises a fusiform midline unpaired swelling called hypobranchial eminence. Hypobranchial eminence. This hypobranchial eminence is divided by a transverse sulcus. A transverse sulcus divides it into ventral anterior or cranial part, dorsal posterior or caudal part. This overall hypobranchial eminence development is contributed by the anterior part is contributed by the second arch, anterior part also is contributed by the third arch, like this, and this posterior part is contributed by fourth arch. So this part of the hypobranchial eminence is developed by the contributions of second arch, third arch, fourth arch. The anterior part of this hypobranchial eminence in front of this transverse sulcus will give rise to posterior 1/3 of the tongue. So this posterior 1/3 of the tongue is developed from here. Is it clear? And similarly, this posterior part of this hypobranchial eminence will give rise to epiglottis. Here you find epiglottis. So this epiglottis is developed from the posterior half of the hypobranchial eminence. But the fusion of this lingual swellings, tuberculum impar, and the fusion of this hypobranchial eminence over it now happens. Suppose if this is first arch, this is second arch, this one is third arch. This third arch overgrows over the second arch like this. This third arch overgrows over the second arch and gives rise to this sulcus, this V-shaped sulcus, which is called as sulcus terminalis. Is it clear? And in between this anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3, that means here you find a median thyroid diverticulum arising in the form of thyroglossal duct, which descends downwards, and on reaching the appropriate level it proliferates to form into thyroid gland proper. Later the thyroglossal duct disappears, but its beginning is present as a remnant on the tongue in the form of a blind foramen. Hence this is called as foramen cecum. This is called as foramen cecum. This is foramen cecum, represents the beginning of the thyroglossal duct. So this is all about the development of the mucous membrane of the tongue. Now coming to the next one, that is the development of muscles of the tongue. Muscles of the tongue are developed from occipital myotomes. Upper 3 or 4 occipital myotomes gives rise to the development of the muscles of the tongue. These myotomes drag their nerve, that is the hypoglossal nerve, along with it, and that is the reason the hypoglossal nerve is seen to be coming downwards like this from behind, lying superficial to the internal carotid artery and external carotid artery in the neck. Is it clear? So the muscles of the tongue are developed from the occipital myotomes. And the third one, the fibroareolar stroma, which binds the muscles of the tongue together, is developed from the adjoining mesenchyme of the branchial arches. So this is overall the development of the tongue under 3 headings. Now we need to know the developmental anomalies also. The developmental anomalies include when there is absence of the development of the tongue rudiments, the tongue may be absent. So agenesis of the tongue or aglossia. Number 2, when one half of the tongue, one half is not developed. So they will be seen the suppression of growth of the tongue on one side, that leads to hemiglossia. Is it clear? So one half of the tongue is not developed. Third one, tongue tie, bifid tongue, I can put it as bifid tongue. When instead of these two lingual swellings, if they doesn't fuse and instead this alone directly is fusing with tuberculum impar, this fusing with tuberculum impar, you can see a tongue like this. So this is called as bifid tongue, which is a common feature in a snake. Fourth one, this is very important, ankyloglossia. Ankyloglossia or tongue tie. I have said from the floor of the mouth, the tongue should get separated by the formation of alveolo-lingual sulcus. This alveolo-lingual sulcus. If it, instead of complete formation of the sulcus like this, which separates the tongue from the floor of the oral cavity, if it is incompletely separating, the tongue gets fixed to it, characterized by slurred speech, characterized by shorter frenulum, and that condition we call it as ankyloglossia or tongue tie. Mind you, this is because of the failure of formation of alveolo-lingual sulcus properly. And the last one, lingual thyroid. Lingual thyroid. This represents the beginning of the thyroglossal duct, but when the thyroglossal duct, instead of not descending downwards, if that median thyroid rudiment in the form of that duct develops within the tongue, a thyroid gland may be developed in the tongue. So when it is in the tongue, it is called as the lingual thyroid. So these are the 5 developmental anomalies which you need to remember, and for the main development, it is under these 3 headings you need to write, and this is all about the development of the tongue and its anomalies. Thank you.